Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Tales of the LGBTQ+. My name is Douglas Parsons. I'm coming to you from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and I wish to acknowledge that I learn and work on Treaty 6 and Métis ancestral lands. The traditional meeting grounds, gathering place, and traveling route to the Cree, Saulteaux, Métis, Dene. We acknowledge all the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. This is where we will strive to honor and transform our relationships with each other. If this is your first time coming to Tales of the LGBTQ+, welcome. This is a podcast that is visual on YouTube and audio on all other streaming services. This podcast has been created to share your stories, our stories, of the brilliant rainbow community that we are in. And we thank our allies as well for tuning in, hearing what we have to say, and celebrating our successes. If you have not done so already, here on YouTube, please press subscribe. If you are listening through a podcast through, let's say, Apple, please leave a message, the star ratings. That helps us greatly, because those reactions do get noticed by Apple, and the algorithm switches to make sure that this podcast is shared with more people. So thank you very much for everything. This episode is part one of a two-part series looking at the history of the Imperial Sovereign Court of the Wild Rose. Part two takes place 1 week from today at this very same time. Here's a little bit about the Imperial Sovereign Court. The Imperial Sovereign Court of the Wild Rose is based here in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. But in reality, they go from Red Deer, north, all the way up to the border of the Northwest Territories. There's a lot of space involved within that. It is a sovereign chapter of the international court system since its inception in 1976. It remains Alberta's longest running organization for the LGBTQ+ community. The Court of Edmonton is proud to be at the forefront of many significant Canadian court firsts. They had Canada's first Native American Empress, Millicent, Empress I, Canada's first Black Empress, Gracie Spoon, Canada's first female Imperial Crown Prince, PePe, Canada's first straight female empress, Mother Jean. They were also the very first to be represented in any legislative assembly in Canada in full regalia. Who's the only other person to have been able to do that? That would be Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II. Tonight, we're going to start this first, a two-part series looking at the Imperial Sovereign Court, and there's a lot of history that goes with that. So I'm looking forward to learning more about the system here in Edmonton, and potentially learning a bit more about where they're going here in the future, especially with coronation taking place in the middle of August. There's so much more to this, so let's get into it. Tonight's special guests, and yes, I'm going to introduce them with their full honors and titles. Deep breath. I can do this. First, he is the Silver Towel Jubilee Impresario, the Strength of the Wild Rose, recipient of the Royal Order of the Maple Leaf, Emperor 25 and Co-Regent Emperor 29. Please welcome, once again, Ron Byers. Before I bring him to the screen, we're also going to introduce our second guest for tonight. Even deeper breath. Her Imperial Sovereign and Gracious Majesty, Ms. Flashback 16, Ms. Gay Edmonton I, Matriarch of the Gays, Empress 14, 30, and 36 of Edmonton, recipient of the 2016 Jose Honors, the International Imperial Order of the Double Eagle, the Queen's Mother's highest honor, the International Royal Order of Jose I, the Royal Order of the Maple Leaf, the Royal Order of the First Empress of Canada, Ted North, for distinguished service, heir apparent to Nicole the Great, Queen Mother of the Americas, the Oops, She's Done It Again, silver-tongued Unity Empress of all Alberta. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Leah Way. Oh, I don't think we have any more time.
I think I should have some more titles in there.
I think so. Leah put all of her titles in there, Ron. I think you shortchanged yourself.
Yes, I'm Kmart Empress, the Queen of the Drag Races. I got a few more there.
Well, welcome both. I'm really interested in learning more about the Imperial Court. There's so much good that has been done. And so let's start right from the beginning. Ron, from everything I've read, you were there from the very start. Can you tell us what happened that day and why it was so important for you to be part of the group of people that created the Imperial Sovereign Court of the Wild Rose back in 1976?
What happened way back in that time period was that three good friends of mine, John Reed, who was one of the owners of Flashback at that time, and two good friends, Dwayne Shave and Bob Pellerin, the three of them went out to Vancouver to attend this big coronation ball. Vancouver had been part of the international court system, which at that time was only 3 cities, San Francisco, Seattle, Portland, and then Vancouver, so 4 cities. So they went out to the Vancouver coronation and were so blown away by what they saw and how great it was that they came back and called a group of us together in April of '76. We all met at Jimmy Stevens' apartment downtown in the Palisades. They had a penthouse suite there, and Jimmy and his partner Jack hosted a bunch of us and brought over their neighbor, who was very lovely, Mother Jean Lawson. And we all sat around and talked about how wonderful this concept was, and thought we should probably do the same thing here. So it was agreed that day to ask Vancouver to initiate us, I guess, into this court system, and so we started planning our first coronation ball and started running a campaign.
What was life like back then in 1976 for the LGBTQ plus community when it comes to the politics or being open with your sexuality?
Well, and back in '76, of course, people were still behind closed doors. I mean, just even getting into a gay bar was not an easy thing to do. All the gay bars at that time were all private clubs. You had to have a membership in order to get in. Flashback in particular kind of opened some of those doors up. John Reed's main focus when he developed the club in '75 was that it would be for gay people and their friends. And the and their friends was the most important part of the mandate of Flashback. He felt that it was important for gay people to be able to have a place that they could bring their friends, their workmates, their family members, and have them feel comfortable within an environment that they themselves felt protected and comfortable. It was certainly a very still behind closed doors environment at that time. So for us to have this first coronation ball at what was then known as the Executive Hotel, it's now called the Coast Edmonton Plaza downtown on 105th Street. That was quite something, because they had no concept of what was going to happen. And when they started seeing all these men coming out in wigs and dresses, they were kind of intimidated.
Yeah. Leah, when did you start recognizing that there was a drag queen circuit, or there were shows, or even the Imperial Court itself?
So I first started coming to the bars in probably 1985. I had just graduated from post-secondary school and was trying to make my way in the world, and actually, interestingly enough, well, I think it's interesting, is that when I first started going to the club, I really avoided the drag queens. They were loud, obnoxious people that I could not make heads or tails of in my own mind. And I actually made a point to not go to the bar on nights that there were big drag events or big drag shows. And then I realized that I was limiting myself to maybe 1 or 2 nights a week because the drag queens were out everywhere all the time. And so it was really a second coming out process for me, was getting involved in the drag community, actually.
And when did Leah take flight? When did she catch her wings and get out there?
I had a roommate who, when we moved in together, I did not know was a drag queen. Her name was Kimberly, and she was she was a drag queen, not like the rest of the drag queens. Like she had that Grace Jones, that Grace Slick image to her. She was had that very tough exterior. And what actually happened, I had a very tough day at work. I'd come home. She was like, let's go out, let's do this. And I was like, no, I'm not going out. I'm staying home. I'm going to wallow in my self-pity. And she's like, how about I put you in drag? And I was like, no, what are we talking about? And she's like, hey, it's early. I'll put you in drag. If you really don't like it, you've still got time to shower. We'll go out and we'll party. We'll have a great time. So it was a Friday night after a long day at work. To put me in drag. We found some stuff that I could get myself into. And that was the night I was born. I went out to Flashback with Kimberly and Twiggy and whole sorts of people that I'd seen and looked at in awe, and now got to meet and talk to in person. And I think for me, it was that whole idea of Ian. When Ian first came out, Ian was very quiet and shy. You won't find too many people in this community that will believe you about that. But I was very introverted, quiet, shy. You know, I was the type of guy that wouldn't say crap if my mouth was full of it. Layaway provided me the mask and the ability to be able to do the things that Ian couldn't or wouldn't do.
And that's the case with a lot of drag queens. Doing drag for a lot of people, myself included, putting on a costume and makeup is a form of expressing yourself in a different manner than you would be able to do on your own as yourself. And that's where the personalities, develop. I've always maintained that there are 3 sides to me. There's me, the person, the family person. There's me in a professional world, and then there's me that is out performing as well. And they are 3 totally different people.
So the court itself, we need to make mention of its framework and a little bit about how it came to be. I'm going to put on the screen for the people who are watching on YouTube a link for the international court system. And for our listeners who will be listening to this at a later time, internationalcourtsystem.org. Ron, can you tell me about the hierarchy and what happens within the order when it comes to year in and year out with what you want to do as part of the Imperial Sovereign Court?
Well, the Imperial Sovereign Court system itself was started way back in 1965 in San Francisco by an activist and eventual politician, Jose Sarria. And he became known as the Empress Jose, the Widow Norton. And he started this in San Francisco. And it sort of ran on its own as a sort of an independent local thing until 1971, when Portland, then Seattle, and then Vancouver joined into the circuit as such. they've operated very loosely at that time. There's, you know, they sort of had protocols, but there was nothing really set down in stone. And as more and more cities started coming on board, with, you know, Edmonton being the second Canadian city, coming in 1976, some protocols started developing. Now, Edmonton was quite famous for not following protocol. We did everything we could to try and defy protocol, because we didn't feel that we had to, you know, be as stuffy as but they felt they had to be in the U.S. But you know, over time, that as more and more cities joined and became a bigger organization, there became a need for it to start setting down protocols and you know, kind of rules and regulations on how everything works. And that's, you know, now what the international court system is sort of based on. Cities can still do what they want. We can still do, to a certain degree, what we want here in Edmonton. But you know, we have to you know, kind of follow some protocols that they have set down as a standard for every city.
Well, and part of that comes because of the figureheads and members of their court that are doing the traveling. It helps people to know what to expect when you go to perform at another city, or when you go to a coronation in another city. Some of those protocols help make the evening run smoother. Some of those protocols help make the evening run way longer than they should, which is why, as Ron said, in Edmonton, we have abandoned some of those, because there was a time in our history when part of our tagline was the wildest party children in Canada, and we lived up to that. And so, you know, two, you have to think about when this organization started in the 70s, and you know, much to the mid 80s, late 80s. There wasn't email, there wasn't, you know, Facebook, there wasn't any other means of connecting with people. And so part of the court was also a way, if you were traveling to another city, you could contact your sisters in another city and go, hey, what is a safe place? What is a safe area for me to be in? Where do you go cruising? Where, you know, although yes, I'm coming to see the coronation, I'm also coming to explore your city, but I need to be safe. And that was also part of this, really, right?
And it's interesting to note that the international court system is the second largest LGBTQ plus organization in the world. We have more members and more chapters than any other queer organization anywhere else in the world, with the exception of the Metropolitan Community Church, which holds the first position. And you know, when it first started out, generally there wasn't much purpose to it other than to have a big gala fancy dress ball once a year, you know, and any money that was raised, you know, through the ball itself, and maybe in some minor events leading up to it, was primarily to put on the ball. I mean, that was it. And it wasn't until the AIDS crisis hit us in the early 80s, and it was the international court system that stepped up to the plate and provided a good deal of the money that was needed for HIV and AIDS research in those early 80s, particularly in the San Francisco area, but right up the Western Seaboard. I mean, right here in Edmonton, the Edmonton Court gave the AIDS Network, which became HIV Edmonton, we gave them their first donation, and we raised that money in the bars in Edmonton, and that developed a whole new purpose for the international court system as a whole. Drag queens everywhere up and down the Western Seaboard started doing drag shows, particularly to raise money for AIDS research.
With my understanding of the court system, at the very top, there is the Empress and the Emperor. Then we have the Prince and the Princess, Duke and Duchess. Has that always been the way from the beginning? And is that from the court system, or is that something that Edmonton did itself?
It has not always been that way. In fact, for the first couple of years, we didn't have a prince and princess. We had a czar and czarina, and they were appointed as in general. I was actually the second czarina, but I kind of resigned from that position partway through the year, and so someone else took over. We kept those for a couple of years, and then I think it was like reign 5 or 6, somewhere around there, we converted to Prince and Princess, and we retroactively went back and renamed the proceedings as Prince and Princess as well. But yeah, I mean, it has now, the hierarchy has sort of always been there, but not necessarily all the titles.
There's a great article that you can find online from eCamp, which is Edmonton City as Museum Project. And Ron here, as well as Rob Borowski, wrote about the first 25 years of the Imperial Sovereign Court of the Wild Rose. You can find more information online later. There's a few things that was written within those articles that I did not know before, but there was a lot of focus on Empress #1 Millicent, for who she is, as well as what she was able to achieve. So I'm going to throw it out to whomever, but can you tell us more about Empress Millicent?
Millie had been a part of the gay community for a good number of years. In fact, it was her and the second Empress, Kathy Jackson, that they did one of the first public drag shows in Edmonton in 1969. They were both teenagers at the time. I don't think they were even old enough to drink in the bars yet. And they did a drag show at a cabaret or a nightclub that was owned by Pierre Cochard. Now, Pierre Cochard these days is more well known as J. Pierre. Back in those days, he had a club called Pegasus on 106th Street, just north of Jasper. And Chatty and Millie performed drag. They were both hairstylists in hair school. That's where they had met, and they decided to do a drag show one night. And so that's where Millie started. Millie was also there when Club 70 opened up, and when it first started. She was a witness to the 5 signers that created the charter for Club 70 in 1969, 1970. And then she was a part owner of Flashback when it opened its doors in November of 1975. So when it came time to start the court in 1976, well, Millie decided that she needed to run and become the first Empress as well. And so she did. And Millie's background, she's an Indigenous person. She was born on treaty land, and she is the first Indigenous Empress in Canada. She was elected and reigned, and the houses the following courts after that became known as the Imperial Houses under Millicent, which was her formal name. But she was quite a character. She cut hair as a living. She drank a lot. She was out in the bars a lot. She was definitely #1, and she made sure that everybody knew that she was #1. In fact, she would often go out into a bar and with a slightly crooked figure say that she is #1. And she was very well known for that.
And, by the time I had started doing drag in the late 80s, Millicent, I don't think I ever saw her do drag, but she was always a presence. And if you were interested in getting involved with the court, she was somebody that you had to talk to, and she was somebody that sought you out and made sure that your intentions for her organization were pure, and that you were going to follow her rules, even if they were just her rules and not codified anywhere. I remember that, after I had been crowned Empress, she had cornered me in the elevator at Flashback one night because I wasn't wearing my crown, and gave me what for, as you are the Empress of Edmonton, you need to be wearing your crown. And we had a good laugh about that. The other thing that Millie and I had in common, and we were the only two, and well, because Flashback is no longer, will always remain the only two, but She was Empress and Miss Flashback at the same time, as was I. So it's a little bit of history that not many people remember, or some even don't know about.
Looking at the history and everything, there's the Empress, there's the Prince and the Princess, but there is no Emperor. And you alluded to this a little bit, Ron, in your article. And I'm putting you on the spot a bit because last weekend I was talking to some friends about this upcoming podcast, and I shared with what happened, and they did not know this. So why is there no Emperor number one?
An Emperor number one was crowned that first night by Ted North, who was the Empress of Vancouver at that time. He came out here and crowned an Emperor and Empress. He kind of got himself in a little bit of trouble. He was, we suspected that he had stolen money from that evening. And then he was named as a person of interest in a murder charge. And it was decided that at that time that we would strip him of his title and remove his name permanently from the record, which is why he's not talked about that much. In writing history, though, we felt that it was important that that still be documented, even though it hadn't been talked about in 40 plus years.
Yeah. And I thought it was important to bring up tonight, simply because here it is in your very first year of existence, and something happens that could have just made everything fall apart. The house of cards could have demolished. And yet 46 years later, everyone is still here. The system is in place, and it has been a triumphant success. So what is it about those first few years that caused everything to go right, despite what potentially could have been very damaging?
We've had more than one instance where we've had things that were potentially damaging. Even in 1981 with Emperor V Joe Boy, he was on his way to the Pisces bathhouse the night it was raided, and had he actually gotten there about an hour earlier, he would have been charged as a found-in, and his trial would have been right around coronation of that year. And again, would have been a stain on the court. It could have shut the court down. And there's been other things that have happened along the years. But, you know, when it comes down to it, it's still a group of volunteers from the community who have a vested interest in keeping an organization going. And, you know, when the AIDS crisis hit and it became a mandate of the organization to start raising money for donating to organizations that were doing AIDS research, then it was essential that we keep going as an organization. So we had to overcome all the odds. We had to overcome the years that we didn't have effective emperors and empresses. We had to overcome the years where, you know, the bars may not have liked us that much, or only one bar would have us in doing shows. But, you know, in the end, it all works out, and we are still here 46 years later.
And I mean, that said, we are by no means the only imperial court organization that's had its troubles, right? You know, thinking there was at one time, we don't have as many now, but there was at one time 76 chapters across North America. And so there have been a number of chapters that have either shut down or have had their instances. And so part of what the International Court Council does now is they do have a committee that will help courts who are having some problems work through those. So that's part of the bigger brotherhood, the bigger sisterhood of being part of an organization, is that we've got lots of people who have had those experiences that we can lean on and say where to go to. But yeah, I can only imagine those first few years. It was like, wow, here we are, year one, like you said, and we're in a little bit of trouble.
The name Joe was just mentioned here. And for people who watched episode number 2 of Tales of the LGBTQ+, I interviewed Robert Hamilton, who wrote a memoir discussing his life growing up and coming out in the 1980s, coming out in the time of HIV and AIDS. Joe was very much a lot of the content within the memoir as well. So to learn more about Joe and his fight with HIV and his eventual death from AIDS, do please check out Robert Hamilton's book, and I'll make sure that I place another link here as well, because it does add to the story of the Imperial Sovereign Court of the Wild Rose. Ron, you've mentioned a couple of times the words HIV, and we're now 6 or 7 years into the court, and now word is getting out that there's this cancer spreading through San Francisco, New York, other higher populations. As we talked to you before, word is getting out in Edmonton, and all of you are noticing this taking place in Edmonton. How did HIV and AIDS form what the Imperial Court of the Imperial Sovereign Court of the Wild Rose, how did it form and shape as you moved through the 1980s and into the 1990s?
Well, certainly back in those days, I mean, when we first started out, the court basically was just, it was a fun gala night that we had once a year. And that really was it. That was it. I mean, we had no other function. We had no other purpose. I mean, somebody got elected Emperor and Empress, and, once a year we had this great big fancy dress ball, and, they get to do shows occasionally throughout the year and claim that they're the Empress of Edmonton. But when the AIDS crisis hit, and the government was not coming up with any funding, local researchers at the U of A were desperate for money, and some local organizations were forming, like the AIDS Network, HIV Edmonton, and people living with HIV. There's several other organizations that were doing work as well, and they needed money, and the money was just not available through the government sources. So as it had happened in San Francisco in particular, and up in Seattle, Portland, Vancouver, and other cities, the courts really got down and then started doing regular shows at the bars. They would go in, they would do a show, they would collect donations, they would collect tips, they would get cover charges at the doors, and all those funds would be donated back to the local organizations that were really needing the money to help continue the work to do AIDS research and support the people that were living with HIV and AIDS at that time. And that sort of gave the courts in general a new focus or a new mandate on what we do and who we are as an organization. We became a fundraising organization as opposed to just a fancy dress ball group. And that really shaped, who the international court system is today. We're not doing as much money focused into AIDS research, because now there's lots of government funding available for that. Instead, we can choose who we want to support, during the various years. And we've supported a number of local organizations, Make-A-Wish Foundation, the Small Children's Hospital. There's a number of local organizations that have been benefited from the fundraising that we have done throughout our years. And as important, and it was important that there was money available for people to be able to do the research, for people to be able to do the campaigns. I think what was equally as important and this is also where the court really was able to step up, is during that time, we needed people. We needed people who could be out there. We needed people who were big and boisterous and could draw attention when people just wanted to brush it under the carpet. I was Empress. I stepped down in 1990, so I was Empress at the height of the AIDS epidemic. And I can tell you, for me, I was in drag 5 or 6 nights a week, most weeks of my reign, just being out there, as Ron said, raising money, being a voice for the people who couldn't have a voice for whatever reason, because they were too afraid to have to be that voice, because they didn't know how to be that voice. And at that time I was 24, 25 years old. So as a young gay man, it really did drive me and give me a sense of purpose and a sense of belonging in the community, that I was able to be a voice and help
with something that so many people we're just not acknowledging, we're not wanting any part of. And I think, you know, the courts, we banded together, and the court system, we really, I'm really lucky. I think that I was around during that time, that I got to be Empress the first time during that time, because I really do believe that it was that participation that has probably saved my life.
Yeah. Scott Bryan, who was a previous guest of Tales of the LGBTQ+, during the interview, he mentioned that he had gone to over 70 funerals in 1989 alone. And Ron mentioned as well during his interview that he no longer goes to funerals these days, just simply because there was just too much. And so for both of you to be here to tell the story of what took place in the 80s, being a witness is brilliant. And thank you for that.
And we have to acknowledge the emperors and empresses that we have lost, and princes and princesses and dukes and duchesses that we have lost to HIV. They have been many and plentiful as well.
Yeah, well, let me mention some of the emperors and empresses for the first, let's say, 5 years. And if there's a name that stands out to you and you want to tell more about the person, please do. So the first imperial house under Millicent, the Empress was Millicent. Princess was Chatty Cathy Jackson. The Prince, John Reed. The second year, the second imperial house under Millicent, the Empress, Mrs. Chatty Cathy Jackson, Emperor John Reed, Princess PePe, Prince Bobby. The third imperial house under Millicent, the Empress was Nikki, Emperor Tony. The fourth imperial house under Millicent, the Empress was Rayette, the Emperor was Michael. And the fifth imperial house of the undersea world of Atlantis, the first year where the name was different, the Empress was Trixie, and Emperor was the previously mentioned Joe Boy. Who are some of those names that stand out to you today?
Well, I just saw Hoopy 2 days ago, and he still looks like Hoopy. Chatty Cathy Jackson is still alive and well, and occasionally comes out and performs, not as much as she used to. I think that she is considering doing a performance in the near future. That was the last I heard. You know, they were kind of the go-tos. John and Chatty were kind of the go-tos for year two. They wanted to get the organization off its feet in year one, but they were kind of set up for year two to be Emperor and Empress all along. And Nikki was a very dear friend, particularly of Chatty's, and so he was kind of a shoe-in to ring for year three. And Tony, Emperor Tony Jensen, he's doing well. He doesn't come out as much anymore because he's getting up in years. Michael and Rayette. You know, Rayette moved to Regina. She still does shows regularly there. Michael doesn't come out much. He's still somewhat active in the community, though not very much. He's retiring from his job in the next couple months because he's becoming an old man.
And you will love me for saying that.
The shame.
Hopefully he's not watching.
You know, I think
I will find it and I'll send it to him.
You know, Chatty being our current matriarch, but also just being the person that he is. You know, I've always said, at least since I reigned, you know, if you want the best piece of advice on going into this as an empress, go sit down and have a conversation with Chatty. That will make your mind up one way or the other. And I know one of the best pieces of advice I ever got before I stepped up as Empress the first time was from Chatty, and it was simple, right? And then sometimes once we get that crown on our heads, we forget about it. But she's like, you're here to serve the people. Your job is to make sure that the people of your realm have what they need. So when you walk into a bar, you stop, you say hello, how are you, before you do anything else. And you know, it turns out that that's a great piece of advice for life in general.
What happened in year 5? Because the first 4 years, it was all under Millicent, but then year 5, there was the breakaway, and the name changed to the Imperial House of the Undersea World of Atlantis, with Empress Trixie and Emperor Joeboy. Why did the change take place that year?
I think it was because we discovered we could. And that was pretty much it. I mean, you know, in some of the U.S. courts, they had that hierarchy, particularly in San Francisco, where it was under Jose. They had this hierarchy, and all the houses were under Jose, and we kind of followed suit for a while. And then I can't remember who it was or what city it was, but somebody decided to break away from that, and so we were quick. We jumped on that too, because of course we were one of the courts that just loved to break protocol. So yeah, I mean that's why the change. And then after that, I mean, all the houses they are all still houses under Millicent, but each court kind of created their own designation.
Yeah, and the names are fantastic. So we're in the early 80s at this point, and I'm going to continue to go through because I do want to name the people who were involved and recognize their contribution. So for the 6th Imperial House of Polaris, the Star Court, Empress Lindy Starr, Emperor Daryl.
Yes, Daryl. Mr. Vera, he went on to become. He was also Emperor 17. He ran against me because I ran for Emperor that year. And he then became Mr. Vera, Empress 25. So he ran as my Empress. So yes, he was known as Daryl.
You mentioned now run against. Before, it sounded like it just was, this is the natural person to continue on, and then there's the natural person afterwards. When did it become more of a competition where people could then vote for who they wanted to have as Empress and Emperor?
It was a competition right from the beginning. There was 3 people, I think, that ran for Empress I, or 2 for sure, Grindel and Millie. And I thought there was a 3rd one, but it's not coming to mind right now. There quite often is more than just the one person. But some years it is just one person for each title. For the 25th year, I mean, Mr. Vera and I campaigned years in advance, letting everybody know that we were going to run in 2000. Vera 2000 was our slogan. So nobody dared to run against us because they would have lost anyway. And in fact, even though it was a yes/no vote, somebody actually brought some voodoo dolls for those who wanted to vote no, and I still have them here with the pins that they were sticking in for no votes. But yeah, I mean, the vote. I mean, having campaigns is part of it. I mean, running a campaign creates shows, in advance, which creates publicity for the ball. And we were also using those as fundraising opportunities to be able to put on the ball and produce the very expensive programs that we were producing at that time as well.
The 7th Imperial House of the Mega Mentals, Empress Mrs. K, Emperor Sam.
Sam unfortunately passed away.
Empress Mary Mess and Emperor Rick. The 9th Imperial House of Dirty Diamonds, we have Empress Lulu LaRude and Emperor Buster Box. And for the 10th year, which was very interesting, we have a longer title. The Unified Decade Imperial House of Divine Excellence and Motherly Love, the Crystal Gondola Empire, and the vast wonderland of the North, home to the wildest park children in Canada. Empress Amiel Nitrate and Empress Mother Jean were the empresses. No emperors that year. So there's a lot of information in there. Leah, do you remember which year you recognized as kind of the first time you realized that there's the court? Is it around this time?
Yeah, it was probably sort of the first person I ever saw at the bar wearing a crown and being glamorous was probably Lulu LaRude. I was still at the point of shock and awe at that point. Mother Jean actually happened to babysit me, something that she told me later. She's like, "Oh, you're all fancy in a dress now, but I used to change your diapers when you were a baby." So, it's a small world at that. But the first coronation that I actually attended and went to in drag was Coronation 11. So
I think it'd be important to stop for a minute too at this point and talk a little bit more about Mother Jean. Yes. During that 10th year, she wasn't actually campaigning, and nor was she at coronation and crowned. What happened with her is that Amy Nitrate, she was the elected empress at that time. She felt that she couldn't complete her reign and asked to step down. And so the court decided that they would appoint Mother Jean Lawson as the empress that year to finish out the year. Now, Mother Jean Lawson, everybody called her Mother Jean. Jean Lawson was a straight woman. Her husband had passed many years before, but she loved hanging out with the gay guys. She would often sit in the King Eddie Hotel Tavern downstairs in the basement and have this whole table full of young gay men around her, cackling and having fun and having a good time. She became kind of a pivot person in the gay community in that Club 70 at that time in the early 70s was the only gay bar that existed. She was denied entry to the gay bar because she was a straight woman. And that infuriated a number of people within the gay community. And that is what propelled some of them to create Flashback. So Flashback was born out of the treatment that Mother Jean got within the gay community as a straight woman. And during the rest of her lifetime, she was an avid, dedicated supporter of the court, and she loved being around her gay friends. She was an amazing woman.
When I take a look at the pictures of her, she strikes me as a Mrs. Doubtfire in looks. Would that be correct?
Ian, she was.
Yeah. I mean, I could see that resemblance. She, Mrs. Doubtfire in the face and in the looks. Certainly not the body build. She was much lighter than that, but yeah.
She had a mouth on her. She could cuss. She could cuss with the best.
That is true.
Yes.
I want to go to the 9th reign because there's an infamous name in there, or I should say famous, Lulu LaRude. And to know more about Lulu, you need to read Darren Hoggin's book for the Edmonton Queen, which talks a lot about Flashback and Darren's connection with Lulu. I'm looking at this just from the words I've read in stories, but Lulu had a different personality and would have probably tried to do many different things. Can you talk a little bit about Lulu and her year of the 9th Imperial House of Dirty Diamonds?
She was certainly mouthy. She was a larger than life person. She very much was in your face. She was larger than life. Is about all I can say. I got to know her as a person when she her lung collapsed, and I went and got her from the hospital. And very few people know this. I went and got her from the hospital. And I spent some time with her, at her place when she was recovering. and got to know the person behind Lulu, and what, he was an amazing man as well. Very quiet, very much the opposite of what Lulu was.
And I'm not sure if you or any of our viewers have watched the Pose series, about the balls in New York, and they're certainly different than the coronation balls that we're talking about here. But when I first met Lulu, reflecting on it now after having watched the series, that's what she would remind me of if we had had that here. She would be that house mother, that person that would take people in, that person that would show them the ropes, that person that would show them how to navigate the gay community and be safe. At the time that I met Lulu, she was living in a house in the Grandin area. And if you ever needed anything, if you were ever having a problem, if you needed a safe place to be, you could go to Lulu's. And there may be 10 or 12 other people there. There may be nobody else there, but you always knew he provided a safe haven for many young gay people in the community.
And she was supported through her year as Empress by a really wonderful person as Emperor Buster Box. Ralph lives in San Francisco now. He's still active to a degree in the court system, though, down in San Francisco and San Diego area. And he was such a gentleman. He was always right next to Lulu when they were attending court-related events. He would make sure that she got home safely. He would help her get ready. He was a perfect gentleman, and probably, you couldn't have asked for a better emperor for somebody like Lulu.
What is the role of an emperor in many cases? Because the empress is mostly the person who's in drag and probably is the star of the show, but the emperor has an important job as well. So what is the role of an emperor?
Pretty much what I said. Yeah. They are the arm candy. Basically, they're the person that the empress is holding on to when she's entering the room. They're the person that's going to make sure that her train doesn't catch on anything. They're the person that's going to go and get the empress her drinks. They're the person that sometimes picks them up and brings them out to a show, or goes and gets their jewelry, or yeah, they're the arm candy / helper / gentleman.
Yeah. Leah mentioned this in her answer. She mentioned the words house mother, and I know a little bit about what this means, but at the same time too, I'll put it out there. After an explanation of what a house mother is that somewhat dying away within the drag queen circuit, the movement itself?
I'm not. Yes and no. I mean, you could look at today's drag community, and somebody like RuPaul is a house mother. So it still exists to some degree. There is still, people spawning off younger drag queens, helping them out and whatnot. Not maybe not the house mother role, but more the the mother for younger queens that are coming out, giving them guidance. So that still exists to a degree within the community.
Yeah, I would say it's not as prevalent as it was back when I first started doing drag. When I first started, it was kind of that whole, the first person that ever puts you in drag is your mother, and then all of their relatives become your relatives, and they're the person to show you the ropes and take care of you. But and I think for me, part of it is the times. It's young gay people, young drag queens have more freedoms and more information that they have accessible to them, that it is easier for them to navigate through the world than it may have been for some of us without the availability of some of what's out there now.
And not every house mother is necessarily a drag queen either. I mean, I put Mary Messing to address the very first time. I also put the illustrious Twiggy into address for the first time.
Oh,
Really?
so you're the problem.
Yes.
Yes.
And it was my purple sequin dress.
Oh, I wore that once.
It got around.
You know, and that's another part of kind of some of the exciting history. Like, I'm looking at that picture of Lulu on the court page as her Empress picture, and she's wearing the circle crown, which actually ended up becoming once we changed crowns, that crown that she's wearing as her Empress crown ended up becoming the Gay Edmonton crown for a number of years, and that was the crown that I was crowned in as Miss Gay Edmonton.
Well, I want to talk about the 11th Imperial House of Age and Adventure, because this is now with yourself coming in, Leah, Empress Beverly Crest and Emperor Sig. I only know stories about Beverly. And so here's the time now for you to tell everybody, who was Beverly Crest?
Who was Beverly Crest? she was loud. I mean, Lulu LaRue was big. Beverly Crest was even bigger. She was much like what's his name? That drag performer from Australia. His name is escaping me. He's well known. He reminds me a lot of him, and people would know. He's been around for decades. Beverly Crest, you know, she was definitely an odd one. She was also a hair cutter, barber, and she would hang out in the bars on a regular basis. She kind of at times did her own thing. Sometimes she would pick up a cause and start raising money for it. You know, she was definitely a part of the gay scene, and a very active part. And she let people know that when she was around, and you could usually tell when she was around because you would hear her bitch across the room.
I think Ron is thinking of Dame Edna.
Yes, that's the person I'm thinking of. Yes.
And I mean that embodies Bev to a T. She was certainly Edmonton's Dame Edna. She spoke her mind and didn't care what anybody thought about it, but she certainly was able to get things done.
Her emperor was Sig. Now, Sig has her own distinction in that she was the first female emperor in Canada, and she played it as a woman. She didn't do male drag at all. She was a woman through and through, and she was elected as the first female emperor.
So this would have been approximately 1987, if I'm doing my math correct.
Yep.
So with Millicent being Indigenous, and now we have Sig, there's a lot of firsts. And so let's talk about House 12 and then get to House 13. House 12, Imperial House of Vicious Knights and Imperial Pleasures. We have Empress Orifice and Emperor Teddy Bear. And then the 13th Imperial House of Pit Bulls and Poodles, Empress Gracie and Emperor Jim. Now there's a combination for you.
So that's going from grace and elegance to rough and dirty.
Yes, absolutely. Which part of that would have been the Pit Bulls and which one of that would have been the Poodles?
Well, Gracie was the poodle.
Yes.
But if we can skip back to the 12th house just for a second, one of the things that I remember fondly about Aura, she was actually only 20 years old when she became Empress, and one of the youngest Empresses on the circuit. In fact, there was some question about her traveling to the USA because lots of places, right, their legal drinking age is 21, and so that was interesting in itself. Teddy Bear was, in fact, at the time that he reigned, married to a woman, and his wife was fully supportive of him and the organization, and came out and supported us at all of our events. And, you know, and I think probably it was this house that really that really made us international. I think before this, yeah, there had been some dabbling of emperor and empresses going to American coronations, but Aura and Teddy really were the turning point for that, and really put Edmonton on the map in terms of international support within the ICS.
And that traveling that they did and putting Edmonton on the map paid off in spades for them. Their coronation ball, when they stepped down, was the highest attended coronation ball I think that we've ever had, and it was held in the Edmonton Convention Center, and we literally filled the place. It was huge. And I emceed that with the very gracious and loud Lulu. And it was amazing to see all these out-of-town courts. I mean, just dozens of them from across North America who showed up to celebrate the reign of Aura and Teddy Bear. It was quite amazing.
And not only was that probably our biggest coronation, most well-attended, it was probably also one of our most extravagant. Aura was probably one of the first beady empresses. Every gown that she had beads on it and dangles. And you know, the other interesting thing about that ball, we were on the lower level in one of the ballrooms. Upstairs happened to be Stampede Wrestling. So it was quite an interesting evening. We had the 500, 600 drag queens and their escorts on one level, and all of the wrestling people on the other. And not to say, at some point in the evening, a former Empress of Calgary, Stephanie St. Asia, did go up to the wrestling ring and make an appearance.
In the meantime and in between time, that's it. Another episode of Stampede Wrestling. If Stu Hart would have played it right, he would have had more of the queens on the show for sure. Looking at firsts, going with Gracie. Can you tell me a little bit more about Gracie herself?
She wasn't over the top by any stretch. She was, a very elegant. Yet she could still party with the rest of them. But she wasn't loud. She wasn't brash. She was a good performer. She knew her lines. And she was just, a really nice person. She was a good empress.
Yeah, Gracie was somebody that I believe was thrust into the position. Jim was going to run, and Gracie was somebody that people knew could tame the beast a little bit because of her personality, because of her sensibility, and yeah, she was a great performer and brought lots to that position, especially as a Black man, being that out, being in a Black man in a dress that had layers of issues with it just in itself, right?
And to talk about the era, was there pushback against the court for electing the very first Canadian Black Empress? Was there pushback from the community or from other courts?
Edmonton had a very, very small community from people of color. There was almost, maybe a handful of Black people that actually came out to the bars. Edmonton itself didn't have a very large Black community at that time. And the community that was here were mostly immigrants. And so they still had their own social and cultural things to deal with. And being gay, within a lot of the cultures that many of the Black community came from, just was not acceptable. So many of the people that were likely gay could never come out to the bars. It was just an impossibility for them. So, you know, the Edmonton community had very, very few people of color in the early years, and it wasn't until, you know, the Edmonton community itself, the colored communities started, you know, their own, you know, ability to be more open about gay people within their own cultures and the community.
As we go through the beginning years of the Imperial Court, it seems to me that the 14th year has no significance at all. So we'll just skip on to the 15th year. Leah and Ron. Yeah. So no, the 14th Imperial House of Silver Tongs and Dance, Empress Leah and Emperor Rob. So now we're on to Leah, her first reign. Leah, why was it important for you to step up and be Empress for this specific year?
There were a couple of things. You know, at the time I was a flashback queen. You know, there was sort of the queens that did most of their stuff primarily at flashback, and there was the group that did their stuff primarily at the Roost, and there was a little bit of rivalry there. And Brandy Bodine, who was Gracie's princess, had decided that she was running for Empress. So the group kind of got together and decided there needed to be a flashback queen to run against her and have that competition. But and part of it was there were some queens out there, some of the mean queens, you know, that said I would never be good enough to be Empress. And, you know, my mission then was to prove them wrong. I will not only be Empress, I will be a good Empress. But I think more importantly, it was right at that time. I had just been Miss Gay Edmonton. I had just had that opportunity to find my voice. I just kind of had that opportunity to start finding my place in the community and realizing that within the organization, I could hold a place where I could do things and help people. And it was something that I could do as Leah that Ian couldn't do. I was working for Edmonton Public Schools at the time. I didn't think, you know, as a gay man that I could take some of those stands that certainly Leah could. And again, it goes back to that whole idea of me being able to put on a mask. You know, I was young and pretty, or I think I was young and pretty. But, you know, I did make up well enough, you know, that unless you really knew who I was, you wouldn't make the connection. One, because Leah was loud and out there, and sometimes, you know, to the point, too much as like people were like, holy cow, like who pissed in her cornflakes? But, you know, that's how I got things done, whereas Ian never was. And so it was important that we were at the, you know, the height of the AIDS epidemic. We needed people to be able to step up and stand out and speak out for the people that couldn't or wouldn't. And it just felt that that's where I needed to be at the time.
We also need to add in here as well that it wasn't until 1998 with the Delwyn Vreen case, you could have been fired based on your sexuality as well. So being at the forefront, speaking up for the community, fighting against HIV, AIDS, getting that funding, that's dangerous in many ways. So Leah, I assume, would have helped you in so many ways.
Ways. Yeah.
Your emperor that year was Rob, not Rob Borowski, a different Rob. Your princess was Twiggy, and your prince was PePe. There's a lot involved in this here, but let's first start with your emperor, Rob. Can you tell me more about him and how he helped you during your year?
You know, Rob was the consummate gentleman. Rob took care of me. Rob did all the things that an emperor needed to do. He made sure I was where I needed to be. He made sure that I was front and center. He made sure that the spotlight was on the organization and where it needed to be. Rob was also one of the very first emperors. I would say probably Emperor XII Teddy Bear was the first emperor that sort of took enjoyment in the performance side of it. Rob was a former dancer and very good looking and easy to talk to. So to be on his arm always meant that there was a group of people there, whether they were trying to get to him or talk to me, right? But he was great, and he did lots of things that shone a light on our community, and more particularly on me and the work that our house was able to do, you know. And he's still around, actually. So
actually, he just kind of re-emerged back into the court in the last year.
Yeah,
we look forward to seeing more from him over the next little while too.
so yeah, actually, it was our triple decade last year, but we are getting to celebrate it this year. So we're looking forward to a fantastic performance from him, and maybe doing some reconnecting. Having PePe as the first female prince in Canada, again, another milestone for us. And what's interesting, right? Even with Gracie, even with Mother Jean, I don't think within our own community it was such a big deal. For us, it just was. But for many other people, it was like, wow, you guys are on the cutting edge. Do you realize that this is the... And it's like, no, this is just the person that needed to be in this position at this time, right? And for me, you know, Twiggy has always been Twiggy and has always been an icon. And so, you know, she always would push me to be better, right?
Mm-hmm. So with PePe, would she or he, in performing as a prince, would he be considered the first drag king performer in the prince role?
I would say
that was
yes.
Part of the court?
Yes.
Okay. Now, how were you able to outshine Twiggy during that year? Because when I see Twiggy, I see a lot of bedazzled and things like that. But when picking a princess, you went for somebody who can shimmy a little bit.
And you know what? It was a combination of things. It was Twiggy letting me have the role. It was Twiggy allowing me to shine, but it was also a huge part of Twiggy behind the scenes, giving me those tips, helping me refine my makeup, showing me the shimmy, showing me the little extra moves. This is how you extend your finger. This is how you draw. I couldn't have asked for a better princess. And in those days, sort of one of the rules was that the Empress always closed the show. And so I always had to go after Twiggy. So there would be a Twiggy performance and then a Leah performance. And right, so it just forced me to be a better queen. And I'm under no illusion that she let me do that.
So what is your biggest takeaway from your first reign that year? What stands out to you as your biggest accomplishment that you were able to do as part of the Imperial Sovereign Court of the Wild Rose?
I think that during that year, my biggest accomplishment or the thing that I take away from it the most was the fact that the four of us got through it, because we were also a busy group, but the fact that we had set some goals, we had set some fundraising goals, and we were able to bring those goals to fruition. We were also able to bring information and awareness and maybe a lightheartedness, and maybe that's not the right word, but out of something so terrible during the AIDS epidemic, you know, I think that my year was that year where people started to heal, where people started to look at this in a different light and go, I can make a difference.
We have a audience question here that I'll put up on the board. Quinn is asking, were you flashback number 1?
No, I'm too young for that. Millie was flashback number 1. I was Miss Flashback 16.
Yes.
Oh yeah, and the one title that I did forget to put in there, I was Miss Alberta Gay Rodeo at some point in all of that too.
I remember that.
How do you get that title? Never mind.
Yeah,
the thoughts are going through my head here.
There was
something involved.
I'm going to go back to Darren Hagen's book here because he mentioned something that I want to ask all of you. And this kind of goes with Stampede Wrestling now. Stampede Wrestling, or in professional wrestling, they would have a match where there's like the belt on top of a pole, or there's some type of object that you had to fight for. In the Imperial Sovereign Court here, there was something else that was put on a pole. I believe it was a crown or a tiara, and perhaps at an after party. Can someone tell me more about these after parties?
That actually wasn't the court. That was the Miss Flashback weekend. It happened on the May long weekend. They decided to have their Miss Flashback contest annually, and it was always held on the May long weekend. Back in the late early 80s, I and two very lovely lesbian friends of mine bought a small hobby farm out near Toefield. It happened to be across the road from the acreage, which was owned by one of the owners of Flashback, Brent Earl. And he had told us about this property, so we bought it. And one weekend, I was hosting the Sunday afternoon drag races, and we decided that we should maybe invite people out after on the Sunday evening for drinks. And we were surprised that 75, 100 people showed up that Sunday night, somewhat drunk. Why they were driving on the highway drunk, I have no idea. But they did show up, and so we thought, oh, this is kind of fun. So it kind of became an annual thing, and it evolved to the point where the following year, somebody grabbed the new flashback crown when they happened to be passed out in the field somewhere. And shimmied up the telephone pole that we had on the property and put the crown up on top. So when the newly crowned Miss Flashback woke up, discovered her crown was at the top of this telephone pole and that she had to go up it in order to get it back. That kind of became a tradition. It was more related to flashback. Certainly the flashback queens and the court queens were pretty much a crossover. And I'm not sure exactly which queens it was at that time that started it. Gloria certainly had a hand in it, Darren Hagen. But yeah, that was a fun part of the 80s, but not directly related to the court.
So Leah, did you have to shimmy up that pole to get your crown when you were Miss Flashback?
I actually did not, because unfortunately, by the time I had stepped into that role, that tradition had wavered, and I believe the farm was no longer in existence at that time. So that I did not. Thank goodness, because the crown would still be at top of the flagpole.
But that farm also at one of the coronation balls. And I have to think, I'm pretty sure it was at McDonald Hotel. I think it was like ball 4 or maybe 5. We brought in a pig to the ball and allowed the pig to walk because she was the Baroness of Toefield.
Most excellent 15th Imperial House of Divining Rod, A New Decade, Empress Twiggy, Emperor Pierre, Princess Jackie Two-Step, Prince Nellie Michael. The 16th Imperial House of Women on the Edge, Empress Mandy, Emperor Brian, Princess Ginger Snapped, Prince Daryl. And for the 17th year, the recycled, environmentally friendly 17th Imperial House of Androgyny, Empress Mary Mess, Emperor Mr. Vera, Princess Marcia Black, Prince Tony Curtis. With Empress Mary Mess, this is the first time where you've got an empress who was an empress before, and she's run again.
Yes, she was Empress VIII, but Emperor IV. And as Empress VIII, it should be noted that Mary Mess established the bursary, which became known as the John M. Kerr Bursary Fund, which has provided scholarships to Edmonton and area students since that year, since the 8th year of our reign. And we have given out tens of thousands of dollars in bursaries. And that fund was created by Mary Mess. Now, that particular year when she was running for 17, I had decided to run with her. She was going to be the Empress. I was going to be the Emperor. But Mr. Vera decided to join the crowd as well. He was campaigning against me. At that particular time, I was also heavily involved with as part of Klondike Days. So during the month of July, which was the campaign period, I was out marching bands around downtown Edmonton, disrupting traffic, and marching big marching band competition at Commonwealth Stadium, and I did that most of the month of July. So Mr. Vera, in the meantime, was going out and doing all the campaigning, buying people drinks and getting votes. So when it came time to the election and the voting, she won, and I was bitter. I became quite bitter because she was buying votes from people. But as
buying votes, I love that. Buying votes.
I still accuse him of buying votes that year. But I became president of the court that year, and it was very much a team of three. The three of us would be at the bar all the time that year, and I would be right behind the two of them, and I'd be whispering in their ears and just telling them, "You are partying too much. It's time to go to work and make some money." And it became a very successful year for the court that year.
Leah, as you're no longer the Empress at this time, what is the role of an Empress after you've stepped down and other people have taken up the role? What do you do during this time?
It depends, right? And lots of people have different takes on it. Some people continue in and doing the fundraising stuff, and I was still part of the organization at that point. I was still doing what I could to be helpful. Again, you're not the star of the show anymore, so you're taking your cues from the Empress. Mary was gracious and always looking for support and help, but that's really what it was, and it was a more supportive role at that point in my life too. I was just sort of really at the beginning of my career, and lots of my focus had gone into my boy work and that kind of thing. So I was still out and about, but not as heavily involved. Yeah, for lots of us, it's that ebb and flow, right? Depending where we are in our lives.
The 18th Imperial Carrot House of Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit, ... Empress Marcia, Emperor Tony Curtis, Princess Gretchen Wilder, Prince Jim. And I just have, before we talk about more.
I want to take a note here of Marcia, because she holds a particular distinction with the court right now, in that she is the first trans woman who is in the process of discovering her true self at that point in time. And so she is, in effect, the first trans person that was a part of our Emperor and Empress's circles. And certainly not the last, but she was definitely the first.
And that would have been the 18th house. Her emperor, Tony Curtis, was he 18 years old? I look at the pictures of him and I wonder.
He was definitely young looking. He was a fun guy, and as part of his step down, he decided he wanted to do something pretty spectacular. So he pulled together a group of people, 6 of us, and I was part of that group, and wanted to do a tribute to the village people. So we performed one of the village people songs. I think actually we performed a couple of village people songs, and that kicked off a performance troupe that continued from that year, 94. Our last performance was in 2010, before we decided to shut it down. And we did shows all across Western Canada, performing this village people impersonation review that Tony Curtis created.
And just as a matter of note, I did play the part of the leather man in the village people review at one point.
I can see that. I can see that. Although the cracking of the whip would have been interesting to watch.
Scott Bryan also played the Leatherman in the group.
Ah, Scott has played the Leatherman in many places.
Yes.
The 19th Imperial House of GI Gals and Glamorous Joes. Empress Gretchen Wilder, Emperor Jim, Princess Natasha, Prince Horst, and the 20th Imperial Color Coordinated House of Lace, Lame, and Lounge Acts, Empress Tutsinelda Wolf and Peacole, Emperor Mr. Vera, Princess Weena Love, and Prince Jim. I think now would be a good time to bring in Jim, because Jim hasn't been mentioned to this point in any of the Sovereign Court shows or that we've been talking about, or the drag, but Jim has played an important part behind the scenes when it comes to the Imperial Sovereign Court. Can you tell me more about him?
He was kind of a bar person that was, just sort of there. He was kind of arrogant and self-centered, but kind of a fun guy. He was sort of was the stable person behind a lot of things.
Jim liked things to be organized and in an order, and so sometimes when things were getting big and blown out of proportion, sometimes we would look to Jim to go, how does all this fit? And and he had some great computer skills, and of course, right around this time, computers were coming in, and so was giving lots of, like you said, behind the scenes expertise and how we could change things and do things, along with Ron, in that realm. But Jim certainly played a very important part in many of the houses, even when he wasn't part of that upper house, just as, holding some things together.
I mentioned the 20th house, the 20th reign with Tutsinelda. This is now getting to the point in time when the cocktail had been produced and found for HIV. Things might be different now in the community, perhaps a sense of relief. You mentioned before the Imperial Sovereign Court of the Wild Rose focused a lot on raising money for HIV scholarships. Did the finding of the cocktail change where the court sent their charity money, or was it still all systems go when trying to help the HIV and AIDS community?
I can't really remember when we sort of transitioned away from giving solely to HIV and AIDS related organizations. Certainly it was around that time, but I don't actually remember when we actually selected another organization that was sort of outside of the HIV and AIDS. I know one of the first organizations that we supported off and on was the Pride Center of Edmonton. In some of the early years that they got going, they often were short on rent, and the court stepped up and paid the rent for the month. And that probably was likely the first organization that wasn't HIV/AIDS related.
Well, and it was also around this time when, for lack of a better term, the government came to their senses and decided that they also needed to have a part in this, and they started providing funding. And so it was, I remember sort of one of the first big government initiatives was, we will match your funds up to a certain amount. And so the court was really good about saying, okay, then we'll give you that certain amount, and then the government will match your funds. But as Ron said, then we also started looking elsewhere within our community. Who else within our own community needed help? And so I think that was a big turning point too, was then when the government said, we can find you some scraps of money somewhere, because this is not just about you. This is about all of us as Canadians. And
has a grand total ever been counted as to how much money the Sovereign Court of the Wild Rose has raised for charities and scholarships?
I don't think anybody's actually sat down and done that. It's funny that nobody has, because I'm sure the amount would be staggering. I'm sure we would be millions.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not talking just petty cash out of a person's pocket. Hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars have been created for the Edmonton area, for all of these different charities and scholarships themselves. The middle of August is an important time for the court. Can you tell us what is taking place in approximately 3 weeks' time?
Well, each year, the Imperial Sovereign Court of the Wild Rose concludes the reign of that year and honors the reigning Emperor and Empress at the coronation ball, and they do step-down performances. They step down from their role as Emperor and Empress, and later in the evening, the new elected Emperor and Empress are crowned by the College of Past Emperor and Empresses. And that is actually taking place August 14th of this year. It's an 80s themed prom type ball. And given that, we haven't been able to do this for the last, it was 2 years ago, the last time that we had an actual event where we could all go out. We're kind of doing more celebration this year. So we're celebrating the previous year's reign to a degree as well. We at the balls, we also honor, past reigns that have happened. Like this year is my double decade reign for Emperor 25. It was 20 years ago that I stepped down, and Leah had her triple decade last year. Wasn't able to have it celebrated, and so she's getting an opportunity to do that this year. Most of the tributes to past reigns are being done on the Friday night, the evening before the ball, in order to keep the time length down, because otherwise we'd be there from 6 o'clock at night until 6 in the morning watching drag, and none of us really want to do that.
This will be Canada's second live coronation since the pandemic. Hamilton is having theirs the weekend before, so I think it'll be really different than what we've ever experienced before. There'll still be lots of protocols that people will be following.
The current Emperor and Empress, that would be Tanner Steele and Carrie DeWay, will be here on Tales of the LGBTQ+ next Thursday night at 7 p.m. And they're going to talk about stepping up and taking on these roles, raising money, and keeping the Imperial Sovereign Court of the Wild Rose running and creating money for these scholarships. So we're going to talk to them next Thursday night as well. Leah and Ron, I'm sure because you've been part of the court for a while, and I'm sure that there's times where you have to shake your fist at clouds and go, oh, these young kids, they're doing it this way. But there's something really special about the last 2 years and the emperors and the empresses, the prince and princess, duke and duchess who stepped up and have had to do things in a different way. What can you say to Tanner and Carrie Douay about their reign and how proud you are with the way they've been able to do things?
It took a little bit to wrap your mind around, and one of the things that I kind of likened it to is that I was an empress during a pandemic, and not the same type, because it was very different. I mean, we were allowed to go out and do all those things, but just, to have the courage at the beginning to say, yes, we're walking into this, and yes, we are going to do the best that we can do, right? They need to be given, lots of praise for that, lots of kudos, just to say, yeah, we're going to do this. And, I can honestly say at times I had my doubts. I wasn't sure how someone so young, and I don't know either of them very well, and so I don't know what their backgrounds is and experiences are, but they have done a phenomenal job with what they had. And our fundraising hasn't seemed to suffer at all. They set goals, they went out there and reached them, they had the support of the organization, and whenever they wanted to reach out to somebody, there were people there to help them. So good on them. It was hard work.
Yeah, it wasn't easy to go into this last year the way it did. I mean, not everybody was on board with the fact that we would have candidates running and an actual emperor and empress sort of crowned. So it was kind of a point of contention for the court. But ultimately, they became emperor and empress. They had to adapt to new ways of figuring out how to get through the year. And like Ian said, I don't know them that well either. That is one of the drawbacks about this year and doing it the way that they had to because of the pandemic, is that as emperor and empress, they didn't get a chance to really get out and meet people. I mean, yes, you can watch them doing online performances, but that's not getting to know the person, and it's not spending 5 minutes at the end of the bar having a little quiet chat and finding out who this person behind the makeup is. So in that respect, that's kind of the maybe the loss that they have that they are experiencing is that they don't get that interaction that all the rest of us have had, in our years as emperor and empresses, and the people that we met and the new friends that we met and interactions, one-on-one interactions that we had. But certainly, given what they had to work with, the amount of money that they've raised and will be giving away at the ball at the coronation ball this year is quite phenomenal. It's amazing how much money came in through doing online performances. I think it was certainly way more than any of us dreamed it would ever be possible.
Yeah, good on them. Absolutely. And we're going to learn more about what they did and how they did it. And that's next Thursday here on Tales of the LGBTQ+. We're wrapping up here. Ron, we talked before and you're like, I don't know if we can talk for a long time on this. Maybe we can do all 46 reigns in like an hour. Oh, wait a minute. That was Rob, who is our guest next week. But here we are, an hour and 42 minutes in, and I feel still that we're just touching on a lot of things. When you look back on the first 20 years of the Imperial Sovereign Court of the Wild Rose, what are your thoughts? What comes to mind when you reflect upon those days?
We've come a long way. I mean, how we started out and where we were, in year 20, is certainly, there were two different organizations. You know, we started out as a fancy dress night and became, you know, a local fundraising organization that you know, contributed a significant amount of money back into the community. And that's, you know, and that's done entirely through, you know, drag performances. I mean, there is no other organization that does fundraising in Edmonton that does anything like what we do on a regular basis and for as long as what we have. I mean, raising money by putting dresses on. I mean, who does that?
You know, one of the things that I look back on too, and I think for as many different facets as the community has, you know, we've got the leather community, the bear community, we've got, you know, the drag kings that want to do their own thing, we've got, you know, the drag. I really do believe that throughout these past 46 years, at least certainly the first 20, that the court has been that hub. We would welcome people in. We would say, you know, these are the parameters of our organization. If you can do what you can do within these parameters, come on in, have a good time, come when you're ready, leave when you're ready to leave. And I do believe, at least during my first reign, you know, that was part of what made this special. It was open to everybody, and I still believe that it's open to anybody that wants to be part of it. You know, you talked a little bit about the change, and yeah, some of us old timers are still going, why would they make that change when this worked just fine? But you know, evolution is necessary to breathe in the new life, and you know, the little changes along the way. I think, as Ron alluded to, it was a different organization from 1 to 20, and it's certainly a different organization from 20 to 46. But I still think it is a great organization, and I think it's an organization where somebody can go to feel safe and find their footing and find their bearings. And if it's not right for them, it's okay to move on. And if it is right for them, maybe they become the next emperor and empress.
I want to thank both of you for being here tonight and being able to share your history with everyone who's listening. Very much appreciated. And I know both of you will be back sometime in the future. I will find ways to do that. So thank you both for being here tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us.
On behalf of Leah and Ron, my name is Douglas Parsons. You've been listening to Tales of the LGBTQ+. I'm here to remind you to be good and always text when you get home. Until next time, everyone, we'll talk to you soon.